We're gonna kick off the afternoon. We have an amazing afternoon for you. And for those of you who are in the Microsoft lunch, I said this, that it's great that we inspire people. We have some unbelievable speakers with really unique and different perspectives that can inspire everybody in this room to do something different tomorrow. But there is a little bit of a gap there. There's a little bit of a gap in that when you leave, a lot of people say, now what? Now that I'm inspired, now what do I do? And so what we really want to do with this with this panel is to really link the very applied Canadian examples of leadership and what do Canadian leaders of Canadian organizations face on a daily basis. So how can we bridge these two worlds? So we're very lucky to have three amazing people with us. I was going to say super awesome, but I won't. I won't say that. First of all, from Knightsbridge, please welcome the VP of Team Solutions, Dr. Liane Davey. Liane, come on out. Welcome.
Thank you.
Be careful of the stool, because I feel like I may just kind of coast this way, like I'm at a little soda pop shop. We got a little bit about Knightsbridge, but can you tell us what you're working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. My work is around creating individual accountability in organizations for team effectiveness.
Oh, okay.
So everybody we talk to these days says that teams are how people are getting work done, how organizations are really creating innovation, and they're not working. So I'm the one who's working on the solutions to that problem.
Nice, nice. I've always said organizations don't change, people do.
Good point.
You can use that.
I am the organization, right? So,
yeah.
Okay, I'm using it.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
tweet it later.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, so up next, please welcome the Chief Marketing Officer from Microsoft Canada, Cheri Chevalier. Cheri, come on out. Now, Cheri, I understand this has been a really exciting couple of days for you guys, hasn't it? Do you want to tell this is a gray-haired audience. They may not know.
I'm sure. Hopefully, some of you have heard we launched our Xbox One console and gaming device and entertainment device yesterday. So really exciting day for us.
Way back in the distance, I heard one geek applaud. There's one person out there. But what if? So how have you been launching that in Canada?
So we've had a major event cross country, bringing Xbox to our audiences in various ways with experiential opportunities to get in front of the technology and actually really interact with us. So it's been a very interactive launch from coast to coast, and we had our highlight in Toronto last evening. So really excited to see the pictures. They're online on our Facebook page for Microsoft. If anyone wants to check out the launch event, they can go there and see all the fabulous pictures.
Yeah, nice. Rob Ford was playing Xbox, and then when he lost the game, he said it was because he was completely hammered, which is the new excuse for anything. Any screw up in any organization now, you can just say, I was in a drunken stupor, I'm sorry. Well, welcome, Cheri, and thank you for participating. And finally, please welcome the Chief People Officer from ATB Financial, Lorne Rubis. Lorne, come on out.
Got my fan club.
Yeah, that's a little bit too nice of an Alberta welcome.
Thank you, ATB.
Yeah, and Lorne, you said you left your banker suit at home today.
I did. It's at the dry cleaners, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd be wearing it.
Now, Lorne, is the Chief People Officer, is that a traditional HR role, or do you guys look at it in a different way?
It's partly that. Certainly, we're committed to all the normal sort of life cycle responsibilities that apply to HR, but it's different in the sense that we're applying sort of the whole people and culture look through that lens.
Yep.
And I have an obligation to drive one of our major strategic initiatives, which is becoming the place to work.
Albertans, is it the place to work? It's all right.
It'll be a bigger applause next year, Ron.
Okay, well, let's get right to it, because I do want to save some time to get into the audience. I joked earlier and just now about the issue of, in some circles, leaders are letting us down, whether that's at the local level or the federal level. or in sports, or in other places in business. And I don't know. I mean, are people cynical about leadership, about somebody who identifies as a leader? Liane?
Yeah, I think the Rob Ford story is actually a useful one. People think of the Rob Ford story as an indictment of him, and certainly it is. For me, the fact that 25% of Torontonians still plan to vote for Rob Ford in the next election in the fall is an indictment of the rest of leadership in the city. It says to me that we're willing to ignore drunken stupors, we're willing to ignore illegal behavior because we feel that this is a person who finally understands us, who gets us, who cares about the things we care about. So the fact that 25% of the population is willing to ignore that kind of behavior because there is no other leader that reflects them and reflects their needs. So to me, that's the ultimate measure of how cynical people have become. It's less about Rob Ford's behavior and more about the absence of leadership as connectedness in the rest of the city.
Yeah, that's how low the bar is.
That's how low the bar is.
Wow. Has that cynicism, Cheri, like, do you see it within the organization? I don't mean with your senior leadership team or anything, but just people coming in, are they a little more skeptical of leaders stepping forward and trying to lead an organization? Is there a lack of trust there, I guess is what I'm saying.
And I mean, there's certainly instances in the world where there's leaders who aren't being the way we had hoped they would be as constituents. But I believe in leadership. And I believe that there are many good leaders and that the good leaders outweigh the bad. I think there are tremendous examples of corporate and political leaders who are changing the world in many amazing ways. I look to people like Bill Gates, and even since leading us in this tremendous organization that's been built, it's the work that he's even doing now as a leader, as a humanitarian, that's really rewarding. And so I try to focus on those leaders that are changing the world in positive ways, that can influence and motivate people to do incredible things. And there are fortunately a lot of those leaders that we can all look to and aspire to be like.
Yeah. More Mulalas and less Rob Fords.
Right, yeah. Lorne, how do you deal with that cynicism, that as a leader, how do you deal with that within the organization?
Before I respond, just for the record, your questions aren't making me nervous. The water is just kind of spilled out here on the floor. So I think it's such an opportunity because there is some cynicism and because in many organizations engagement's at a deep low. So dealing with that is by taking advantage and framing this outcome that can really provide this elevated difference of leadership, and that just provides then such a differentiator. So I think one way of dealing with it is to take full advantage of it by investing in leadership from both an individual and a collective point of view that just distinguishes you even more.
Right. Liane, is that, how would you solve it? How would you solve this cynical approach to leadership?
Yeah, I think more leadership at all levels, because I think it is the people, at the Bill Gateses, the Warren Buffetts, what they're trying to do with the world, and then it's the people who make a small difference on their team, who do the right thing. That dishwasher from Hard Rock Cafe, who doesn't want to go hire that guy? Like, let's go find that man. So to me, it's more about leadership at all levels. It's about highlighting, and a lot of what Chester said, right? How do we call out, how do we catch people in acts of leadership at all levels? And let's stop putting absolutely unreasonable pressure and a crazy spotlight on our leaders that no one can live up to.
Right.
It really gets to that point. We expect the best story of that for me is the Obama campaign and the 2008 campaign, and all of the lines were, "Yes, we can."
Yep.
And then the minute he was elected, everybody sat down and waited for him to do it.
Right.
Oh no, we meant you. And we have these completely unreasonable expectations. So to me, less focus on one single Marlboro man, we were talking about earlier, and more on leadership everywhere.
Yeah. Cheri, is that tough? Like, you've got Bill Gates going out, he's going to, what is he working on? He's going to cure malaria? Like, I'm going to cure malaria. What are you going to do? Is that tough to live up to that?
I think there's inspiration from that.
Yeah,
and I
sure.
really agree with what you're saying, that leadership can come in all areas of the organization. It's really critical that we as leaders create the environments where that can happen. And I do think people are inspired by that. I think people take that back and say, okay, maybe I'm not going to eradicate disease, but I can make a difference.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding too is it's particularly the youth that are joining our organizations that have this innate passion for making a difference.
Yeah.
And they can do that in a lot of different ways. And I think one of the exciting things is that I'm in a workplace that enables people to do that, to make a difference in some small way that actually has a ripple effect, far beyond what they may even have anticipated when they first started out.
Yeah. And you talk of a younger generation coming in. Lorne, is there a difference with Gen Y? I mean, has this completely changed your approach?
Well, yeah, and I think it's different just because of obviously their context. They're automatically bilingual. They speak technology plus the languages they've been brought up with. They've been at the kitchen table right from the beginning. So they're happy to participate. They want to be right on the strategic plan. And I think it's a great thing. They just bring a different context, and so we just need to be different situationally with them.
Yeah, Liane, are there the stereotypes of Gen Y? Inflated ego, self-entitled, lazy, all that. Is that accurate? Well, how many people in this audience would identify themselves as Gen Y? Let's say this another way. If you had never heard the song that Chester played, That's What Friends Are For, put your hand up. I think I heard someone say, who the hell's Dionne Warwick? So there's like 5 of you here. Okay, good. We're going to pick on you. Are those stereotypes, are they true?
Yeah, so one of the things that I find interesting when we start to talk about generations is we miss that there are a whole variety of factors that drive people's behavior. So there is something about this generation that has always known the digital world. Yeah. There's something about the generation that doesn't know what that little yellow thing that goes in the middle of a 45 is. So there is something about growing up in the 90s. There is something about your salient world being a post 9/11 world. So there is something that is really them. Then there's something, you might remember it, about being in your 20s, no matter what generation you come from. And I think some of what we're seeing in Gen Y is just they're in their 20s. Yeah. They don't have mortgages. I behaved differently and expected different things when I didn't have a mortgage. And then there's always the biggest variance of all is just individual difference in any generation. So I think we have to be really careful to not use those stereotypes, to not tar everyone with one brush, good or bad, and to really appreciate what we get from individuals. As a whole, though, there is something kind of magical about Gen Y. There is something magical about how many things they're able to do at once. There's something magical. It was interesting when Christine Comaford was talking about, she finds normally that the motive of matters happens at the executive level. I think we have a generation who are starting with matters, and that's going to turn everything on its head. So there are some things that are characteristic of this Gen Y, but let's not overdo it or stereotype it, because really we're all individuals.
Yeah, Cheri?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done at Microsoft to embrace that generation is something called the MOC program, which stands for Microsoft Academy of College Hires. And we purposely go out to the graduating classes in Canada and try to have that top talent come and join us at Microsoft. And I can tell you, I've got 2 on my team. They're phenomenal individuals. The energy and enthusiasm that they bring every day, it's phenomenal. It's infectious. Yeah. And so I think even just from the energy that they can bring, it's phenomenal to really take a step back and think if you're bringing enough of this energy into your organization. And with that, too, it becomes a very different, diverse thought patterns. The way I think is very different from the way they think. Yeah. And in order to be innovative, which is what we're always striving to do as an organization, you need different thoughts and different people coming from different perspectives to get you there. Yeah. And this generation's doing a great job with that, with us.
Yeah. What I loved was when Liane talked about the little yellow thing in the middle of the 45s. I could hear people going, what is she, oh yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. A little bread tag kind of thing. Well, that's interesting that, we're defining diversity Cheri, at least you did, define diversity in a little bit of a different way there, of kind of a diversity of thought, in a way. How are we defining, Lorne, how are we defining diversity these days?
We're definitely taking the normal definitions in diversity, and that's just table stakes around those more obvious ways of defining diversity, and applying it more comprehensively around the notion of mind and thought, and taking advantage of the diversity of thinking. It's kind of not what's on your head, it's what's in your head that counts. And but beyond that, diversity is the mix, and that's important, but it's inclusiveness that puts that mix to work. And I think we're all working to bring those two thoughts together, and I think that's where leadership really has to apply its strength, not just on diversity in its fullest, most wonderful way, but inclusion, which really puts that to work.
Yeah, but that's got to be really tough to lead. When we talked about the differences just generationally, but if you're really going to go that, with a diverse team to go that far, how do you lead 25 people who each have a completely different perspective?
So 3 weeks ago, I was in Bangkok doing a team session for all the leaders for Asia Pacific and the Middle East of a big financial institution.
Me too. No, I was kidding.
Coinky-dink. And it would have been fun if you'd been. I think the tone would have been different. It would have been good.
I bet.
24 people in the room representing 14 countries, but the human beings came from 18 different nationalities.
Wow.
And including Koreans, Chinese, Hong Kong, and Indians, Egyptians, Colombians, Dutch, Australians, Americans, Canadians. And what you realized is that listening is hard enough in a team of people who've lived their whole lives in Calgary. Listening and being able to extract value from someone who thinks differently from you, when not only are you trying to appreciate different content or a different business line, but when you're trying to, and literally the guy from Colombia and the Dutch guy sat next to each other. They couldn't hear each other at all. One used emotion in everything. Everything anyone said was either, that's amazing, or that's stupid. Everything was big. And the Dutch person was trying to express his concern about something, but you never would have known.
Right.
And so leveraging diversity, number one is just, we got to learn how to listen. And we're terrible at listening.
Yeah.
So that's something that, it's a skill, it's a muscle you can develop. So that's what we spend a lot of time on. Okay, not only just what did he say, but what was underneath that, and what are his motives, and what's driving him, and what's really there. It's a life's work.
Yeah, it's kind of like getting somebody from Lethbridge and Red Deer in the same room, no?
Oh, no, now we're pushing it.
Now we're pushing
Medicine Hat.
Medicine Hat, yeah. Sorry, Cheri, you had a comment.
No, I was just going to say, I think in fostering that diversity, it's one thing to bring the diverse people together, but it's another to create a culture where diversity is embraced. And I think that's much to what you were saying as well. You have to actually embrace it, and you have to put systems in place that allow people to be who they are. Because if you've brought them just to meet a quota, but you don't build an organization that enables that, you're not going to reap the benefits,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, I think the sucker punch is that somehow diversity means inclusion. It does not.
Right.
And the other part of it is it's kind of like I think John Mackey was saying, is that you've got to manage your cues. You've got to have leaders with incredible EQ and SQ and IQ and positive quotient. And they've got to be very situational, not just in the context of the issue, but in the context of the people that they're working with.
Yeah.
One of the controversial things I talk about in my book is that we can't make it the responsibility of the minority voice to get their point out. It's really hard when you're in the minority to say the same thing over and over again to be heard. So instead, it's the obligation, when you're in the majority in the room, whether that be everybody's from the field and there's only one corporate person, or everybody, whatever the majority and minority is in your team, it's your responsibility when you're in the majority to amplify the voice of the minority. And that's an obligation most of us don't understand. We enjoy the fact that in the majority we can, have power, we can shut somebody down, we can really drown out their voice, instead of saying it is our obligation in the majority to create inclusiveness, to bring out their voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and enabling it as well. So I think that's where technology plays a really exciting role, is that it can enable you to do that. So think of the diversity of having working mothers in the workplace that need to go home and do pickup at certain times, but there's pressing meetings happening. Are you in your organizations enabling people to do that? Are you enabling that diverse perspective of that mother to be at the table through technology like Office 365 or Link or the technologies that are out there that enable you to actually have diversity at the workplace because it's been enabled for you?
Right.
I just want to build on that notion around leadership really being able to manage to contribution and results, and old age thinking around managing to time and being able to see everybody or people showing up at the same time. That world is going away, and it's around balancing autonomy and accountability. And old hierarchical kind of ways, and for banking institutions, it's difficult because you really, used to kind of being product out and very regulatory based, and you want to see everybody at the branch at a certain time. That world is going away.
Well, there were bankers' hours, right?
Yeah, and it's just, and it's a wonderful thing because it's about making that contribution and leading to that versus, using other artificial ways of optimizing contribution.
Yeah. Now, I want to get back to something, Lorne, that you mentioned just a little bit earlier, which seems to be that I don't know if you could call it the leadership paradox, where on one hand, you have to do all these nice, it's like one big group hug, right? Got to make sure everyone's counted, everyone's listened, everyone's motivated, very outwardly acting and listening, which is really nice.
Yeah.
On the other hand, sometimes you got to make the tough decisions.
Yeah.
How do you handle that as a really senior leader? How do you handle those two completely contradicting worlds?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's necessarily contradicting. I think it can work together, and I think it needs to work together. If you think about the most impactful leaders that you've had in your life, the managers and the leaders that have made the biggest difference for you, chances are they had that very unique balance between being firm but kind, being upfront and giving you the raw, hard facts, and caring about you as an individual and as a person. And that paradox and that balance, I think, is very important for leaders to be able to have. I think all of us want to be memorable leaders. And when you think about those people that have been that memorable leader in your life, that's likely what's been a common denominator. And so I think as leaders, we all have to ask ourselves, are we being memorable leaders?
Yeah.
Are we balancing that paradox in an effective way?
Yeah, if there's anything that, I think we're all here looking for the emerging leadership frameworks, and if there's anything that comes out of this that I think that is becoming increasingly important, it is that paradox, and that's okay. You've got to be nice, and you've got to, at the right moments, and in terms of, obviously appreciative, and chess is a great example of that, but you've got to be tough-minded. Ram Charan said that studying 82 CEOs that failed, the primary reason they failed is they couldn't make the tough decisions. You've got to be individual and lead yourself, but you've got to be capable of leading others. You've got to be, vertical in terms of having a vision, but you've got to be fully networked and horizontal. And all those are paradoxes, and that's what's really happening here. It's leadership isn't even individual anymore. The paradox is that it's a system as well.
So I was far more interested in that. Okay, yeah, moving right along. No, that's fantastic. That's brilliant. I think, how do you handle it personally?
Because you just don't stop learning, and the day that you quit, and if you come from that mindset, with Carol Dweck calls it a growth mindset. If you come from that viewpoint, then, and the paradox is that rather than seeing it as much daunting, is to see it as friggin' exhilarating, and to take every opportunity to just go continually into this fierce kind of learning modality. And what a great opportunity.
So, Liane, what are the emotions though? Because I think that's a great point, Lorne, where you said, was 82% of those who failed was because they couldn't make the tough decisions. But what are the emotions? What's getting in the way of people making the tough decisions?
I'm actually just writing a piece right now called "The New Nice," because I think being nice is getting in the way of effective teams, of effective leadership. We have this idea in our head of what nice looks like. And it's really associated with kind of face-saving concepts that, it's not nice to give somebody constructive feedback. It's not nice to tell them their presentation was only so-so. And we have got, what was the thing, the scratch that, whatever that was, the circle with the scratch through it from Christine this morning?
Oh, yeah.
We got to do that. It's not nice to hold in your criticism. It's not nice to leave somebody in a position to fail because you didn't have the courage to tell them. It's really not nice to go into the bathroom and tell somebody else. And so I think one of the problems is that we don't do this warmth and strength equation because it's uncomfortable for us. We claim it's because we don't want to make them uncomfortable. The reality is we don't want to make us uncomfortable. So if there's one mantra I have, it's that, great leaders, great teams are comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the next frontier, I think, is that we all get more comfortable with the fact that being uncomfortable is where growth comes from. We will build trust by giving someone tough feedback, not destroy it.
Right. And so it's called The New Nice? Is that?
The New Nice,
The
yeah.
New Nice. I have a version of that paper called Be a Prick. You can read it. It's out in March. Yeah. And I love that. I love that perspective, The New Nice. That's great.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think
Cheri,
there's
go ahead.
a paradigm shift too for people. Feedback's a gift. It is an absolute gift. When you're given feedback, someone cares enough about you to be able to be honest with you. And if you're not getting any positive feedback, that's hard too. That's putting you in a difficult position. And I think too, one of the interesting things as you increase your role in organizations and you move up the ladder, you hear less and less, and you have an opportunity for less feedback, which is a shame because that's when you need it most.
Yeah, and I want to build on that, on both those points, because none of us are, so the message is, we don't want to be nice. Hey, nice is great. Redefining what nice is, though, that's the vital piece. And we're investing a huge amount in being able to have crucial conversations with each other, deep, meaningful. The relationship is the conversation is the relationship. And if you don't have the tools and you don't deeply care enough, it takes a hell of a lot of energy to do that. But that's nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's kind of the Canadian thing. We say please and thank you to an ATM. Nice is caring enough to tell each other how we feel about each other.
Right.
If it's valuable to anyone here, I'm happy to send The New Nice, my rules on conflict for nice people. If anybody wants to drop off their card at the Knightsbridge booth after the session, I'm happy to send it out to help you. If you're one of those nice people who's not having as much conflict as you need to, I'm happy to share that with everyone.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to interview Jack Welch, and he went a little further as he normally does. But he said, if your boss comes to you and says you have to lay somebody off for whatever reason, and you identify Bill and Sue, and they're like, what? And they don't know that they were the bottom, then that's immoral as a leader. That they don't know where they stand, and that they have kids and they have a mortgage, and you have to fire them, and they didn't know where they stood. It's immoral.
When I finish doing a team effectiveness session with an executive team, people often will go around and someone will finally say, I give you permission to tell me if I don't live up to this commitment. And I stop the presses.
Yeah.
I say, it is not about permission, because permission makes that an option. I said, you have an obligation to tell me if I don't live up to this. And then you feel the weight of it. Then you say, it is my obligation to have your back.
Right.
And if you start to slip, which we all do when we learn a new habit, it's my obligation. So trying to get that really hammered home.
I think the definition of bottom has to change though too. I mean, it's a useless paradigm in some way.
Yeah.
And, it's like got to list your top 10, your bottom 10% of your salespeople, chop them off. Yeah. I mean, that old world thinking isn't very useful. It's the issue is around contribution and diving in to really help people be successful and coming from, and that if the fit's not there and everything's going and they don't have the mindset to contribute, then you've got to make the decision to help make the changes. But it's not just about simplistic kind of bottom and you're out.
Yeah. I want to move on to something I think it's really important. Whether it's process or technology or changing consumer mindset or social, I mean, it's just a chaos of change. You've all heard this before. But how do you lead in a time of such uncertainty? I mean, everything is uncertain about our organizations. How do you lead in that? Cheri, how do you lead in that?
I think it's very important for leaders to be conscious of the shadow that they cast.
Yep.
Especially in times of change. So when you're a leader in an organization, you cast a shadow. And the higher up in the organization you are, the larger your shadow is. And you have to be very conscious of that.
Yep.
I think people look at you to know how they should feel. And if you walk into work and your head's down and you're just barreling straight ahead, people are going to look at that and start to wonder, what is that? There's so much change going on. Why are you upset? And you know, you could have gotten a speeding ticket on the way to work that day. It could have been something completely irrelevant. But people are looking to you to see how they feel and to have the energy and bring the energy to the table that's needed in times of change. I also think in times of change, leaders need to be very consistent in their behaviors and in their actions and in the way they demonstrate their values.
Yep.
Because people will lean on you for that consistency, and they know or should know what to expect from you. They should know what values you have as a leader, and that shouldn't change, even though everything around you may be changing.
In fact, I have different values for Facebook. I have different values, you know. It's not platform dependent. Sorry, Lorne.
But changing in this environment, in this incredible turbulence, you know, both Liane talked about listening capability. That whole capability has just got to go up miles. Technology can help with that, all kinds of things. And Cheri, you talked about energy, so it's listening times energy times, you know, recognizing that you got to show up, and you have to show up every single day. And if you're going to make that choice to participate and announce yourself, show up as a leader. Show up.
Yeah.
I totally agree with those things. Let me give you a completely different angle. If there's something that worries me more than anything else in our current organizational cultures, it's that we're expert obsessed. So here's the interesting thing. The kind of adaptive challenges we're facing now aren't solved by people who are experts in how it used to be or how it is.
Right.
And so when I watch a team, I watch people defer to the expert. I see people, even when I interview them, they'll say, well, you know, who am I to weigh in on that topic? So in that crazy, complex change we're in, and in a land of adaptive challenges, we need to value the naive person. We need to value the person who hasn't ever thought about this question before. We need to amplify those voices. And we are so expert obsessed that if you don't have a PhD in something, or, you know, who are you to comment? So we got to kill that. Adaptive challenges come from people who maybe you know about your consumer because you are your consumer. You know, maybe it's a relationship you have in the community that's valuable. You know, adding your full value comes from very different places, and less that it's just technical expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, the number of people who are billing themselves as social media experts. Out there.
Yes.
Should we take some questions from the audience? Sure. I'm going to have to borrow one of the handhelds. Can I borrow that one, and then would you just share that one? Yeah, okay. As I'm moving into the audience, why don't you just tell us, as a leader, Cheri, what makes you most proud?
I think there's lots of great things about being a leader in the organization. One of the ones that gives me the most pride is seeing people grow into their potential. Seeing people that have started with you in the organization, potentially even out of school or from a different industry, take on challenges that they don't even know if they can succeed at themselves, and then watching them succeed and step up. It's exhilarating as a leader. And I think to the memorable leader comments that I gave earlier, enabling that is what I think helps make you a memorable leader for them, giving them opportunities, seeing them grow and stretch and lean into things. It's really empowering for everybody.
Yeah. As I come to the audience, just put your hand up, and if you have a question. Lorne, what makes you proud as a leader?
I'm going to just take right off of what Cheri just said. There's nothing more rewarding than people coming back at some other time, or even in the moment, and saying, this has made an incredible difference to allow me to succeed, to create, and to build, and to leave value. So it's about how much value that has been left behind in a sustainable way. And when I've contributed in some way, usually as part of some other great group to do that, then that makes me feel great.
We have a question way back here. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. It was interesting when you talked about the leadership creating a shadow. When you do your leadership coaching, how do you get them to be conscious of the shadow that they present to their organization?
I think one of the guiding principles in that is consider the microphone's always on. As a leader, the microphone's always on. And it doesn't matter who you're talking to, where they are in the organization, if you're in the lunchroom or in your office or in the boardroom, the microphone's always on. And I think that's one of the ways that you can be conscious of the shadow that you're casting.
I think I'd add to that the video camera's always on, because we have a lot of leaders who say, well, I didn't say anything. Well, you didn't have to say anything if this was your body language when someone was presenting. Now, I told you I was wearing black tights for a reason. That was smart of me, wasn't it?
I thought it was just the stool.
So even, being aware of your body language and how rolling your eyes or tuning out, or because it's one bar of what comes out of your mouth, it's a really scary high bar because our body language betrays us without us even being consciously aware of it. So really being in the moment, being aware of where we're at, and that's a really important thing to teach leaders as well, because many of them think they're off scot-free if they didn't say anything nasty, when their body language could be as nasty as anything that might have come out of their mouths.
Cheri's book will be The New Shadow. That'll be out in March as well, I think. We have a question right here.
Hi, I was just wondering about leaders who haven't identified themselves as leaders. Maybe they don't know they're a leader. Is there some sort of strategies that you are using to coach those people to understand where their place is in that leadership ladder?
From my perspective, a part of it is the expectation. I think we built just some assumptions sometime in organizations around that there's some magical they that's going to appear, that's going to just be there to figure out the strategy and get stuff done. And you hear, a lot of times you see surveys, you see, when will they? Or, and then when you become the they, you go, oh, geez, So part of it is changing the language in the conversation around asking people around their own self-accountability and just expecting, and people are there. They can do it. They want to show up. And it's part of it is putting them in the frame of mind is saying, what and how are you going to do about it? And when people start asking themselves that question first, the conversation in the company starts to change, the organization changes.
Cheri, how do you, leaders lead people, but how do you, as a leader, where do you get your inspiration from? How do you grow as a person outside of your own team member?
I think it's important for leaders to do a lot of things, and one of them is to continue to stress the learning function. I think we were talking earlier about that. I think leaders have to have an insatiable appetite for learning and for growing. And I also think they have to be very comfortable bumping up against the end of their comfort zone. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. I think that's a quote. Yeah, and I believe that. And I think as leaders, you have to keep bumping yourself up against that comfort zone so you continue to grow. I also think that adversity is a great teacher. And I think as leaders, it's okay to be in situations that may feel troublesome, because that's what really forces you to dig down and really examine who you are and what your leadership values are. And a lot of growth comes from opportunities like that.
Yeah. Lorne, you're the chief people person. Do you have a mentor? Who do you look to?
Sorry, I missed that, Ron.
I said you're the chief people person. Do you have a mentor? I mean, we've talked a lot about mentorship.
Do I have yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's the internet. Every single day. There is so much great content out there and so many great stories. And so, yeah, I have, 10 or 12 people in my life who I regularly connect with. But I think experience is absolutely there, being at the edge, and then having this rich content around you every single minute to pull into some framework. And, we did research in our organization around the compelling leadership moments, almost to a person. It was around these highly adverse, difficult, painful situations where they had to crawl and fight their way through, and that is mentorship in its fullest, most rich way, and not being feared.
Liane, how about you? Where do you go for mentorship?
So same. So I'm the team lady. So I think of it the same way you do. It's really about having a constellation of people who I can get feedback from. I'm interested in the other panelists. I find the more senior I get in my organization, the harder it is to actually get honest feedback, to get valuable feedback about what I could do differently. And that's demotivating. I actually left my previous organization because I couldn't get any more. People kept coming to me, asking me how they could grow, and that was completely unrewarding. So now I find I can get a little bit of something from somebody and a little bit of something else from somebody else. And it's really about creating this sort of board of advisors for yourself, because it is going to be very different things you need from different people.
Yeah, great. We have a question right back here.
Speaking of leaders, and how do you get leaders to leave so that there's room for new leaders to lead, like the transition out?
That's way too diplomatic. How do you fire somebody's ass?
So firing somebody's easy. And in Canada, you just pay them the right amount of money and you phone your Knightsbridge career transition consultant and it's done.
Available at 1-800
That wasn't a Knightsbridge person who asked that, was it?
No, is there a tenure
But
on
I think
leadership?
the question was actually more interesting. It was, how do you get somebody to leave voluntarily? Because I think we want to be able to honor people who were the leaders that we needed in a different era. And we don't want to dishonor that by having bad endings. So I think it's a lot of conversations about what is the next era. We do an exercise where we talk about the eras the organization has been through and what the next era is. And we ask leaders to talk about what kind of leadership will you need for the next era. And it's amazing how often as we go through that process and people really do some soul searching, they're able to see, you know what, I don't have the energy for that era. Or I don't have the skills anymore. And I talk about it like football. Everybody gets to run their 10 yards and get their first down. But
sorry, are you referring to the era as a personal era of
No.
someone new? No, from a time.
No, the strategic era of the business.
Yeah.
What was the era that you were really uniquely positioned to add leadership value in? And what's the next era for us? And what is leadership going to need to look like in the next era? The big Canadian banks are a fascinating example. They were all in an era of heads down, driving leadership in each of their different business lines. The next era is a CEO in a bank who can actually make the banks work well across. And it's a very different kind of leadership. And I think some of them are realizing that it needs a new leader. So, great leadership role models like Ed Clark at TD, realizing that there's a new leader for a new era required.
And how do you prepare? Cheri, I mean, you guys you're not going through this quite yet, but I know that there is a publicly announced leadership change. How do you prepare your team for what may be a new personal era of a different style or approach within the organization because of the person at the top?
I think it's making people comfortable with the unknown. People have to, in today's society and in today's ecosystem, have to be comfortable with change. I think it's a skill that's a requirement for anybody that's going to be successful in the organizations of tomorrow. And change is okay, and change is good. And we're encouraging all of our employees to keep leaning in and to keep being innovative and not get distracted by things that are happening out of the world that they have immediate control over. It can't be scary for people, and I know change is, but we have to get past that because work and life and the ecosystem is so much more dynamic now than it ever was before. It's just reality.
Of all the financial institutions, my money's on ATB Financial to really figure it out when we talk about And the 5 people they brought with them to cheer Lorne on. Sorry, Lorne, go ahead.
I know. It's only 3. I heard that when a baby boomer is heard to cough next door, that the Gen Xer runs over not to check on how well they're doing. But I think part of that answer around the change and moving and making room is to be more intentional about it and to open up for other ideas for people who are there, frankly, who it would be great for them to move on, is to make room in different kind of ways. And I'm not being naive enough to think that, big salaries can be carried in the same kind of way. They can't be, but there are opportunities in some ways. The conversation just needs to happen. We need to open ourselves up and have the courage to make those decisions and recognize it's time for people to open up and allow for other generations to participate more.
We have a question right here.
First of all, as one of the few Gen Ys, I really appreciated the comments.
The shout out?
The shout out on that. In that light, one of the speakers mentioned about individual performance development plans and the onus on the person to initiate that. But how does a person respectfully drive that they want career development, but at the same time they have to kind of be removed from developing their own plan? Like how do you kind of negotiate that as a young leader, I guess would be where I'm coming from.
You come to a great company like Microsoft that has these systems in place. It was a great talk earlier about that performance development, and that's exactly what we have in place at Microsoft. There is a regular performance development discussion that we have regularly with our employees, and we do find, just like the presentation showed earlier, that it increases your level of engagement. And just like was indicated, it's up to the individual person to lead those discussions, and your leader, your manager, is there to guide that, but you really own that. And I think if you're not in an environment where you have that formal process set up, it's okay to just step forward and say, look, I want to talk about this. This is important to me. I can't imagine a manager out there who wouldn't want to have a conversation with someone about how they can lean in and contribute more to the organization and how they can grow. I think a manager would find that very inspiring. And I would serve you very well to have those conversations. But we are also hiring.
Resumes on Microsoft.
So to me, it's about how you do it. So as a manager of Gen Ys, I like less and am less open when the conversation starts with, how can I become a vice president in the next 6 months? Less good. And when the conversation instead is, I use the language of what's the next hard for me? So this was hard for 6 months. It's less hard now. What's the next hard? How can I add more value? What do you see as things that will really stretch me? Where can the organization get more value from me and me from it? So I think the Gen Y mistake, which has really been tempered since the recession, but the 2007 Gen Y mistake was equating their ambitions and their success to a title, and instead of to the value that they're adding and how much they're growing. So I totally agree. As a manager, I love when people have that conversation, but it needs to be focused around adding more value, growing, stretching, as opposed to titles and salaries.
Yeah, I just want to build on that. You know, I think that applies to every level, but rather than coming from a conversation, first of all, around, you know, what are you going to do about my succession plan, which is like a non-starter. The other one is like, you know, how do I get to that title and that bigger salary? The conversation changes dramatically when the person comes in and says, here's some gnarly problems that are out there, and here's some ways I think I can add value, and let's talk about how we can, you know, I can contribute, I think I can. And that conversation is deeply sought after by leaders. We want it.
We have time for one final question right here.
Hi, thank you. It's a privilege to hear all of you. I'm a big fan of Lorne, ATB, and what you do for the culture of your business. But you just briefly asked or said that, hey, we're looking to hire somebody. And I just wanted your thoughts on your recruiting practices. Obviously, all three of you have a great culture which can attract the best people. But how do you go find them if we don't have a big brand company that has such a solid recruitment brand in itself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, in that context, you know, we have some brand challenges around that relative to a Microsoft, for example. But I think that there's so many other ways out there right now around using social media, referral, technology, and I think we'll have arrived when attraction becomes less of an issue for us, and people are so deeply committed to wanting to come being part of an organization that where they can flourish, and we're investing in something we call personal equity. I think when that starts to happen, then it becomes more of us finding the right people with the right attributes to get there. But right now, we're gonna have to rely a lot more on just showing up and our full brand, and think of 5,000 plus associates being recruiters for us.
And I wouldn't underestimate your LinkedIn profile. It's a very powerful tool. You want to make sure that that fully demonstrates the experiences that you've had and the value that you could bring to an organization. I know for me personally, when I'm recruiting, that's often how I do it. The CV will come in, yes, But I tend to go to that LinkedIn profile first to see how engaged they are and how serious they are in that format.
Great. Thank you for the questions from the audience, and let's have a big hand for our panel. Thank you all very much. That was awesome. That was great. Thank you.